Joe, thank you so much for stopping by the LSI studio. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about VESTECK?
VESTECK has now become a clinical stage startup company. We've done our first 3 inhuman procedures, and we've actually got 3 more scheduled within the next couple of weeks. So we're a device company that sutures endovascular aortic grafts to the aorta either at the time of the initial implant, or there are about 1 million patients around the world that have these endovascular grafts implanted, and they're failing at a fairly alarming rate. And when they fail, we can suture those grafts back in place so that they don't have to have open surgical procedures that can be very complex and dangerous.
When you're talking about the graft failing, are you referring to endovascular graft migration?
Well, an interesting question. Depending on the brand, migration is an issue. Many of the grafts put these these hooks up at the top to stop them from migrating. However, the tissue, the aorta itself, continues to dilate. The grafts have these nitinol stents in them, and that radial force tends to push on an already diseased aorta. And so over time, that outward bound, the radial force creates additional dilatation in the neck, and now blood seeps in between the graft and the aorta, and now your aneurysm is repressurized, and now you're back to square one. And so essentially what clinicians have told us really around the world is that they don't have tools to repair this. They're kind of at a loss. They end up having to go back and do some pretty basic things, and a lot of that leads to open surgical repair, and 2, 3, 4, 5 years after that index procedure, the first procedure, you're never healthier. A 65, 70-year-old person coming back 5 years later is not usually a healthier person. Right. And so it's a dangerous redo. So many folks have said if you listen to your customers, they'll tell you what they want. And we listen to these endovascular physicians, surgeons, vascular surgeons, interventional cardiologists, radiologists, and really all across the world, they're saying, we don't have tools. We need tools.
So is it safe to say then that this tool of yours that you're developing is going to be best implemented at the procedure, at the initial procedure, to prevent these failures from occurring, to prevent reinterventions?
That is a very insightful question. And most physicians will say, if we, just like in an open surgical procedure, if we secure the graft, basically if we secure the aorta to the graft at that initial implant, it's not going anywhere. And when it doesn't go anywhere, when it doesn't leak, and that patient's not coming back, that's a cure, if you will, versus palliative. And that is exactly what we're promoting. And then you've got this other group of about 1 million patients around the world that need help when they come back because they don't want to be, in that open procedure.
I'm curious, you mentioned 1 million patients coming back. How many are you looking at annually right now?
Well, that is another great question. Our chief medical consultant is a brilliant person, and he doesn't suffer fools well at all. Sean Lydon is the chairman of the Department of Vascular Surgery at the Cleveland Clinic, and he has come on board as our chief medical officer. Dan Clare was the chairman at Cleveland Clinic. He's now at Vanderbilt now. And when because of their identity, they've created a center. They see 4, 5, 6 patients a week coming back. Now, they're a tertiary care center. They're there because they've got the capabilities. But they're seeing 4, 5, 6 a week coming back that need repair because there aren't the skill sets out in the community hospitals. And so when you talk to them, they're seeing it at an alarming rate. And again, and that converts back to open surgery versus can we give them tools to do it percutaneously when they come back to the hospital.
This sounds like almost a fundamental design flaw with the graft itself. Why has it been acceptable that grafts have this sort of functional limitation to them that requires an additional intervention such as the one that you guys are developing?
Well, it's a great question. And without getting all the graft companies and the FDA upset at us, we'll just say that physicians, I had a teacher at one point that used to say, physics is a cruel mistress, and you can't argue with physics. And this is the manifestation of that. Our bodies remodel, the physics of our bodies, you're not going to argue with. And then our bodies are telling us that this is a partial fix, and it needs some additional help to be a really permanent fix.
In my mind, I'm curious, is there even a way that we could develop like an algorithm or some sort of process to identify who is at risk, high risk of a graft failure based off of characteristics or things of that nature, and then we go in and we say, we absolutely need to use VESTECK in this patient, 100%. Is that something that could be done, or is that outside the realm of physics right now?
No, I'm smiling because you've obviously done your homework for this interview. There is a stratification, an algorithm. When you talk to these advisory board members we have, they can go through exactly that stratification you're talking about and tell us large neck aneurysms, short neck, large diameter, short neck, angulated necks, the conical necks. So there's a whole presupposition. And then you break into the other conversation and say, well, they're already diseased tissues. It's aneurysmal. And if they form what's called a type 2 endo leak, where there's like a collateral circulation back into the aneurysm sac, those will create additional leaks. And 60% of them create these really complex challenges. And the rhetorical question is, Doc, when you did that initial implant and you had a straight neck and it was a long enough neck and it looked like healthy tissue, and 60% of them are going to fail, do you know which 60% before you ended the procedure? And it's a rhetorical question because they don't know. If they knew, they would do something different. Or if they had tools, they would do something different. But they don't know which ones, and they don't have the tools. So it's a double whammy. And it's all kind of coming to a head. In the UK, socialized medicine, right? You can top up and buy some other premium healthcare, private healthcare. In the UK, the NICE, which is kind of a hybrid FDA, they shut down this EVAR repair procedure for almost 2 full years because they knew the cost and the frequency of these patients coming back in a very short period of time was a cost and a danger that they wanted to stop bearing. We think we can save the global healthcare community about $1 billion a year in cost avoidance for these patients coming back. And not to mention, they're not healthier and you know, the comorbidities and challenges that come back. So those Kaiser, Permanente, and Geisinger that are payer provider, so they're the insurance company, they're the physicians and the patients, they're all in it together. They have all the data. They know how rapidly these grafts are failing and how to stratify which patients go which way. And so we're going to work very closely with them to validate the benefits that we're bringing to these patients.
Are these more strategic partnerships then with those institutions that you mentioned, or are you reaching out to them and seeing if they have interest in running clinical research with you?
Another great question. We're going to, when we've got people like Sean Lydon and Dan Clare and others that are luminaries, when we approach Kaiser and Geisinger, we're going to do a 100-patient clinical trial here in support of our FDA 510K. And we've already talked with Dr. Clare and Dr. Lydon about going and who at Kaiser and who at Geisinger, because their perspective on the business of healthcare is extremely valuable, extremely valuable. So we'll make sure that they're in our clinical protocol for the FDA and also allow them to kind of coach us because they've got the data. You know, they're following their patients.
Right. You guys are a clinical stage company. You have a great product that addresses a huge unmet need. maybe coming back to that graft failure, this question is now teasing in my mind that I want to pick your brain on a bit. Why not take your technology and implement it in your own graft?
That's another great question. The predicate device for our device in the 510K was a product called Aptus. And Aptus initially had a suture and a graft combination. That was the device. Unfortunately, the graft design itself was suboptimal, and they had to withdraw it. But the Aptus it literally looks very much like a corkscrew. And Medtronic has done a wonderful job validating with a device that's not easy to use, that when they can get the Aptus device to work, it's very, very helpful for the patients. They do much better. If it's acutely successful, then long-term it's going to be successful. So what we want to do is two things. We want to fit in and work with Gore, Cook, Medtronic, Terumo. It's a $5 billion market. And if we can be like Switzerland and work with all of these grafts, because they all have the same challenge. The only one that's really new is the Endologix graft. They've gone at it a different way in the neck. They're filling it with a polymer. And so we don't want to be putting sutures in a polymer and worry about that. But the other big graft companies globally, we want to be able to work with them and make an already successful procedure more durable and more successful.
You mentioned Cook, Gore, Medtronic, Terumo. Are you in early talks or any talks with any of these strategics currently with your technology?
They all know who we are. I've been around since I had hair down to here. And they know who we are. We're communicating with them early and often. And many of them are watching very closely. And tucking this into a global sales bag would bring the most benefit to patients, more patients, than us trying to start it and build it out and sell it. So tucking this into a Medtronic, who's already evangelized, to their credit, they've done a wonderful job demonstrating the benefits. In the U.S., Gore's the number one market share. I think they might be up to 60% share now. And so, having physicians implant a graft, but then having another company's sales rep bring the VESTECK device in is a little bit challenging, because then you end up maybe putting some of your market share at risk, if you will.
But that's how these competitive landscapes sort of work out, right? Where if a Medtronic wants to get a leg up, increase their market share, they should be looking at what you guys are doing to make their device a more optimal choice over the competitor.
Or multiple choices. Exactly.
Sure, certainly.
My analogy is that GM's got multiple, everybody's not driving a Porsche, everybody's not driving a Maserati.
Unfortunately.
You can have multiple choices. So you're exactly correct. You're exactly correct.
So maybe shifting gears a little bit, and pardon I guess that's a car pun now that we just mentioned GM and whatnot. What brings you to LSI this year?
I went to Grove last year for the first time. We were beginning a raise, and I had a very positive experience there. Met a lot of wonderful people, and it was an environment that allowed a lot of learning, but also a lot of connection. And yes, the meetings, I call it the speed dating, is fantastic. But in addition to the speed dating, the networking, the cocktails and dinner and so on, breakfast, lunch, dinner, the multiple opportunities to connect in meaningful ways with a lot of very impactful people was quite impressive. And so when we got the invitation to come back, it was very much appreciated. And I may have mentioned to you earlier, I've heard from the floor more than once that this meeting is becoming the JP Morgan of, I'll call it, early stage to mid stage startups. And they've got the right investors here and the right companies here that might get lost at a JP Morgan, because it's just such a big meeting.
It's great seeing repeat innovators and companies like yours at these events, because You right front and center on the stage telling us all how things have changed since we last saw you.
Well, I'm telling you right now, I'll be in Barcelona.
Really awesome. We look forward to it then. That's great. You know, you mentioned you were at the Grove, you're here. I'm imagining that you're planting a lot of helpful seeds and growing your network, so to say. How is that going? Has anything from the Grove experience back in London blossomed into anything?
Absolutely. And what I've learned, we all think that people will get to know us and appreciate our value and the story about the company and my capability and credibility, the team's capability and credibility. And what I've learned is that an opportunity to speak with somebody at the Grove and then come back and see them again, and I've probably communicated with them at various times over the last number of months, that I call it waves on the beach. You know, people go to the beach and you just keep coming, and it allows that introduction at the Grove, and then just some reinforcement of who you are, what you are, not going away. We're moving the ball down the field. We're making progress. We're hitting milestones, and then you get to see people face to face again, and the reinforcement that may have started at the Grove or got reinforced at the Grove is now communicated back, where people feel, frankly, comfortable to give you very valid or maybe sensitive information, feedback. You know, you could do this better, or you're doing great here, and that feedback loop from investors is critical. You know, what do they want to see? When they tell you what they want to buy, you give them what they want to buy.
So you just mentioned you're raising money. How much are you raising, and what is that going towards?
Yeah, we've effectively just closed a Series A at about $10 million, just about $10 million taken in. We're starting Series B, $16 million will support our clinical trial, 100 patients, and when we manage the money appropriately on the backside of that Series B with FDA clearance, we'll still have about $4 million in the bank that, as we're negotiating with Medtronic and Gore and Cook about an exit, we'll still have money in the bank so that we'll have our own leverage. We'll be able to continue on, maybe sell product. We're planning on doing, I'll call it a major market, maybe 5 cities, and do the rollout there. So having that money in the bank after the clinical trial is completed will be critical for us. Then we're not out raising money when we've got an FDA clearance in hand, but we can't commercialize yet because we don't have any money. And so Greg Baker today from Vensana was telling me that he agreed with the strategy. We've been very fortunate to be coachable. And so when you ask some, very sincere people what they think about different ideas, when I maintain my humility and sincerity, they're happy to share some thoughts.
Yeah, certainly. The people you meet at events like this can offer you great insights that can, if you are humble, can take and use it to plan multiple approaches. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. It's been a pleasure learning about VESTECK.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time and the opportunity.